Morning, everyone. It's time for us to make a start. My name is Dan Jackman, and I'm the reporter appointed by Scottish ministers to consider the three planning obligation appeals relating to a housing site near Gilmerton Station Road, Edinburgh. In a minute, I shall explain how I shall conduct the hearing session. However, there's a preliminary matter we need to do to make this virtual hearing work. Obviously, if we were all in the same venue, if I directed a question at one of the parties, it would be very obvious who was going to answer. But since we're all in different locations, what I'm suggesting is that each party nominates a team leader, and I'll ask my question to them, and they will be responsible for identifying who in their team will answer and to indicate to me when their side has finishing making the points they want to. Can I ask who will be the team leader for the appellant's side?
So James Finley, Queen's Counsel, I'll be the team leader, although Salter will be doing answering most of the questions fully, but I'll be the team leader.
Thank you. And could you introduce the active participants from your side, please?
Yes. So on my left sits Bob Salter, and behind me, Craig Welton. Those are the only, at the moment, three potentially active participants. Andrew Marshall, who sits behind Mr. Salter, may potentially be an active participant, but it's those the three main ones are myself, Mr. Salter, and Mr. Welton.
Okay, thank you. And for the council, who's the team leader?
Sir Alistair Burnett, advocate. I've been nominated as the team leader for the council, and I'll endeavour to direct your questions in the correct direction, albeit there may be some overlap where more than one of the participants may require to answer a question, and I have asked them to indicate whether they think another member of the team might be more appropriate or have additional information. So I apologise in advance if it's not always the correct person. As you can see, we're not in the same room, so there's less opportunity for a quick prod on the back to tell me who's necessarily the right person, although I endeavour to do that. The active participants on behalf of the council, sir, are the three people who've lodged precognitions. That's Robbie Crockett, who is the council's Learning Estate Planning Manager from the Education Department, Ben Wilson, who's the team manager in the council's Planning and Building Services, and Paul Devaney, who's the East Area Team Manager in Development Management Service. And the other potential participant is Graham Nelson from the Legal Department.
Okay, thank you. Originally, we were going to have a week-long public inquiry that was arranged to commence on the 23rd of March. However, the COVID-19 caused that to be cancelled. Since then, I've held a hearing session by telephone conference regarding the existing and proposed planning obligations on the 25th of March. And I've also held two telephone business meetings, one on the 23rd of March and one on the 27th of April, where it was agreed that there would be various further written submissions, including a statement of agreed matters and a unilateral undertaking to narrow the areas of differences and thus allow this virtual hearing session to take place. I circulated my agenda for this hearing on the 1st of June, and the questions I've prepared are based on all the material for all three appeals that have been placed before me. I'm now just going to explain how the hearing will be conducted. I shall start each item of the agenda by directing a question at one of the parties. It will be the responsibility of the team leader to indicate who will answer. and confirm when their side has finished. I will then invite the other party to comment. Depending on the nature of the replies, either I shall move on to the next item of the agenda, or I will allow another round of comments. Occasionally, I might have a series of questions that I want to direct at one party, and if that's the case, I will say so. If I move on too quickly, I will rely on the team leaders to let me know. Because of the format today, it's particularly important we don't try and talk over each other. So please be patient and wait your turn. In formulating the agenda, I specified the question areas in greater detail than perhaps I might have otherwise done. And I've also included various opportunities for the parties to make other comments to me. So agenda item 2 is intended to be mainly about checking my understanding of the various data used. Item 3 explores the methodologies. Item 4 looks at outstanding policies and principles. Item 5 is an opportunity for you to raise any matters that you think I may have missed. Item 6 is an opportunity for you to tell me the overall conclusions that you think I should draw after our discussion. And item 7 is some outstanding procedural matters that I want to discuss whilst I have you all here. In answering the questions, there's no need to repeat matters if they're already set out in the written submissions or your documents. But if you're going to refer to those, please make it clear so I can find those references. I've programmed 2 two-hour sessions for today. I'm hopeful that will be sufficient time, and I will end the session at appropriate moments in the agenda. We've also diarised a further 2-hour session for tomorrow in case we overrun, and we will obviously monitor how we go. Before we start, are there any questions about the conduct of the hearing? I'm taking that as no. Okay, I have in item 7 set out some procedural points I wanted to discuss, but before we start the hearing proper, any burning procedural matters that we have to discuss? Mr. Finlay.
Well, so yes, just to confirm that not only you have, the first point is not only you have the final version of the statement of agreed matters, but also the what we hope is the final version of an appendix to go with that. And in particular, in the statement of agreed matters, if I could draw your attention to paragraph or section 19, which deals with Appeal 2. And you'll see that there are a number of agreements which we hope you'll find helpful there. Firstly, about the Section 75 agreement being in agreed form, but particularly item 3, that the Council's 4 classroom extension proposal will result in 23 classes, providing a working capacity for the Council's approach of 693, and that summarising 4 and 5, that with the modified Section 70 agreement satisfies the Council's Development Management Subcommittee decision on the 18th of March. And so just for your note, that's at CD 13.13.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Right. So I draw that attention because, as I understand it, that may have an impact on some of the details in the capacity in the tables that you set out at the rear of your agenda, which can no doubt be picked up in due course. The second matter is the appendix to the SOAM, which hopefully you received yesterday, as it's again, we hope this is helpful in setting out areas of agreement to you. There's at present, I don't think I need to draw anything specifically to your attention, but there are a number of matters there that narrow the issues between the parties in certain circumstances significantly, but that will have they will have arisen since you formulated your agenda on the 1st of June. So that's the first point I wish to note in terms of procedural matters. The other ones are really just document matters. The corrected and agreed versions of the modified Section 75 agreements hopefully have been put in parties' bundles at CDs 12.1 to 12.3, and a corrected and agreed version of the unilateral undertaking is at 12.6. Hopefully, again, those narrow areas of dispute. And finally, so as a matter of document numbering, we had provided answers to the questions that you sought, and we suggest that an appropriate number for those would be APP 12. Sorry, 10, my apologies.
Okay. Thank you. I was going to have a wash-up session on documents before I let anyone go, just to make sure I've got the full set. Mr. Burnett, any comments on that, or do you have any burning procedural points?
No, sir.
Okay. Shall we crack on? So if we can move to item 2, the first bullet point, spatial area. Can I start with the appellant's team? My understanding is that the correct spatial area for analysis is the sub-area LG1. Have I got that right?
So I'll pass that over to Mr. Salter, but hopefully he can deal with that fairly swiftly.
Yeah. So the LG1 sub-area is for Appeal 1, but in terms of Appeal 2, that's the Gilmerton Primary School catchment area before and after the catchment review. And I would refer you to, probably the best place there is the CD 13.6, which is the drawing, which shows the sub-area and the before and after catchment areas. And so I would also refer you to CD 6.7 and Appendix 6. Right. So CD 6.7 Appendix 6 shows the amount of houses that will be moved out of the Gilmerton primary catchment area. In total, that's 422 homes that move out of the catchment area. The previous one, so the current one, and into either Gracemount or Broomhills.
And for Appeal 3?
It's the LG1 sub-area.
So obviously, we, as far as we understand it, Appeal 2 is not in dispute. But what needs to be understood in respect to Appeal 2 is what the consequences that may have for Appeal 1, and that's why I drew your attention particularly to the Statement of Agreed Matters, Section 19. And this last point I'd add is that the catchment area modifications have apparently come in place from November 2019.
Yes, the trigger for that was the opening of the Broomhill Primary School in August this year.
So that's our answer to that at this stage, unless we can help.
For the council, any thoughts or comments on that?
Sir, I think so far as the question about catchment areas, it's probably for Mr. Crockett, but as far as a contribution question, perhaps for Mr. Devaney, but perhaps Mr. Crockett first, if you're concerned about how the catchment areas are being formulated and the timing of those.
I think you're on mute, Mr. Crockett. No.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. The catchment areas do come into place as of November for Broomhill's opening in August. I mean, I would refer that really back to I think colleagues who would deal with more with the housing element of it, planning element. Perhaps Ben may be able to comment on that better than I can.
Shall I come in here? So the LGO1 area referred to is defined in the draft supplementary guidance on developed contributions and infrastructure delivery, the draft that's not proceeding to adoption and is only a material consideration of weight, but not something which will eventually form part of the development plan. We note that the appellants are supportive of the definition of LGO1 as a catchment area. We also would note that in the development plan, established development plan context, the basis for taking contributions refers to the contribution zone approach, the cumulative assessment area approach. If a different approach using purely statutory education catchment areas are used, and that's quite different in a lot of different ways, in a lot of factors to the approach that the council's policy framework has taken for assessing cumulative assessment area. And also, it's worth noting that the definition of the new catchment area arises from the proposal to establish a whole new primary school as a part of the local development plan action programme, and a consequence as indeed a safeguard in the local development plan itself as a consequence of the local development plan's growth. And that means that it's important to have regard to not just the land within the newly formed catchment area, but the growth across the wider Liberton and Gilmerton contribution zone of which LGO1 is a sub-area, and have regard to the housing allocations in the vicinity, which are also contributing to school roles, or expected to contribute to school roles, and which have a bearing on the capacity occupied by existing housing, which has been redesignated in catchment areas. That was quite a lot I've just explained, so I'll stop here for now.
Okay, before I offer that back to the appellants, could I just ask the question at the council a more narrow point? Mr. Salter drew a distinction between the relevant spatial area of analysis for Appeal 2 compared to Appeal 1 and 3. Would the council agree with that distinction?
Agree that they're different areas.
Agree that they're the appropriate spatial area for analysis.
We would the local development plan policy DEL1 sets out the principle of considering the cumulative impact, which is required by relevant Circular 3 2012 to indicate to assess the impact, cumulative impact of several developments, and by defining the contribution zones based around areas larger than catchment areas, in some cases grouping several catchment areas together, that allows a proper cumulative impact to be assessed. So we would say that there's a risk to solely looking at the newly formed school catchment areas, because that then disregards the displaced impact of both existing housing and new development out with the statutory education catchment area. This is a point I assumed would pick up potentially under hearing item 4 regarding the fair or unfair pooling of contributions.
We've touched already on all sorts of things which I'm sure we'll pick up during there. But can I just check that I understand? If I had to summarise the council's answer, it's that you would say the correct spatial area for analysis for all 3 appeals is LG1, not just an individual catchment area for appeal 2.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Appellants, any thoughts or comments on that?
Yes, I mean, it may be that we set a false hair running in the sense that I'll give my brief understanding, and Mr. Salter can explain that the council is completely right that we accept the designation of the LG1 sub-area, and that is the context in which all 3 appeals will be dealt with. But the specific arguments about which arise from Gilmerton Primary School, which primarily relate to Appeal 2, but there are consequences for Appeal 1 as well, relate to that catchment area. And I'll ask Mr. Salter to confirm that and add anything he wishes to in response.
Mr. Dillon, you're correct. The LG1 area started off with 2 catchment areas. It is now 3 catchment areas. The council's determination that Gilmerton will have an assumed capacity of 693 changes the working capacity of the LG sub-area as a whole. So in that respect, it has an aspect across the whole area.
So the LG1 sub-area, we're not challenging that, and hopefully that's crystal clear from our documentation. It's just when you're looking at the consequences for what is now agreed on Appeal 2 in terms of Gilmerton Primary School, that has to be considered on terms of the catchment area of the primary school, which, as have been confirmed by Mr. Crockett, have changed in November.
Okay, I think actually there's an agreement, subject to caveats and detailed comments that we're going to touch upon later on in the agenda. So I'm going to move on to the next bullet point, and again start with the appellant. What is the correct time period for the analysis? When is year 0 and when does it end, do you think?
I'll pass that straight to Mr. Salter.
Sir, in terms of year 0, because we've got different methods that we've applied to the different appeals, but the time period essentially is the development period, which we get from the House and Land Audit, latest version, the 2019 one. Year 0 is 2017. And in terms of the completion of development, it is 25-26. In terms of our modified cumulative approach that we used in Appeal 1, it has a slightly longer period, year 0 being 16-17, and that goes to 28-29. And then our school goal projections, which we use for Gilmerton in Appeal 2, that has a longer period, and that ran from 16-17 to 2032 school year. Finally, the cumulative approach adopted by the Council, as far as we can see, doesn't have any time period, because it simply assumes all the pupils from new homes are in the schools at the very beginning, i.e. so year 0, and remain at that same level on an in perpetuity basis.
Year 0 is 2016-17 in all three instances. There are different end dates as far as the applicant is concerned.
Okay, thank you. Council, would you agree with that?
So I think so far as a question of the detail of what's been done, it's a question for Mr. Crockett, but if it's more a question of appropriateness in terms of policy, it's maybe a question for Mr. Wilson. So Crockett, you can go first. We can't actually hear you.
You're on mute, Mr. Crockett. I know the button's really confusing.
Oh, I'll get it. I'll get used to it.
You're in good company.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, I usually work with Microsoft Teams, which works the other way around. It goes red in the other. Anyway, I think from an education perspective, the clock has already started ticking, and year 0 for us was back in probably 2014 when we first started looking at the requirements in this area. From an education perspective, where the commitment to a new school or to an extension is not something that has a set timescale over it. We are committing to not a capital investment, but a revenue investment in the running costs for a new building, which will be there for a long period of time. The build of a school should last for 60 years-ish. So we're looking at the whole life of the project rather than simply a set time period, which may not fit with planning terms, but we have to consider the full revenue cost to the council over the life of the building rather than simply it over a very short period of time. I'll pass on to Ben Wilson, who can respond further from a planning perspective.
Well, bearing in mind what you just heard, we've attempted with the local development plan, the statutory local development plan action programme, to provide, to accommodate the long-term nature of infrastructure planning, provision, and then running. And it's particularly important because whilst the local development plan 10-year period runs from 2016 when it was adopted in November to 2026, and that's the period in which the provisions of the plan and the proposals in the plan are expected to commence development. The actual build-out periods in some cases will extend beyond that, so it will be into the late 2020s while there's still construction taking place for the primary development in the plan, and in terms of infrastructure, either in some cases delivery for the later parts of it, and then its ongoing running, it extends beyond that. So the housing land audit and completions programme will show for sites completions running into beyond the plan period, beyond 2026, but the actual operation of that extends beyond that. And it's an important part of ensuring that the development plan and subsequent plan application decisions, the subsequent Section 75 contributions, and then how those contributions are spent are are planned out over the same period in which infrastructure delivery needs to be considered, and it is long-term planning.
So I wonder if, from your point of view, the relevant period might be said to be the period of the development plan to 2026, but recognising that the repercussions of that will be predicted and felt in a later period, and that shouldn't be lost sight of.
That's right. And in terms of time period, the standard terms we put on legal agreements, if we had to borrow money to, say, cover the gap or cover or front fund bits of infrastructure, the period in which we'll be paying off that extends potentially much longer. And so our current model legal agreement has 30-year period paybacks. So it's significantly longer than the LDP period in 2026. It will depend for infrastructure items. It will vary depending upon what type of infrastructure item it is.
Okay, thank you. I asked the question and I've noted your answers. Can we now move on to the next bullet point, the estimated new housing development? And again, can I start with the appellant's team? I attached with my hearing agenda table 1, which was my understanding, taking from the evidence of the sites and the numbers of houses and flats that needed to be considered. Is that table correct?
I'll pass over to Mr. Salter to deal with the detail of that. But in essence, our argument, our position is that your table provides a sensible working position. Housing numbers change in small instances from time to time. But if Mr. Salter wishes to add some detail to that, he can do.
Thank you, Mr. Finlay. So, your assessment suggested that the future development in the area was 2,784 homes. I think it's simpler just to keep it a total number rather than split between houses and flats. So your figure was 2,784. Our figure was 2,869, and that was based on the House and Land Audit. That's document 13.4. And the Council, in its education infrastructure appraisal, which is
CD 3.5.
CD 3.5, used a figure of 2,809. So our feeling in terms of the overall numbers is your assessment is potentially slightly lower, and the impacts assessment carried out by the Council and the appellant are about 100, 150 homes higher. So,
is that material? Is that material?
Which we don't think is material. The differences between those numbers over a period of time, so it wouldn't be material.
Okay. So how are you asking me to adjust my table 1? I'm still with the appellants.
So I'm happy that you stick with the figure that's the House and Land Audit, which is a figure that we've adopted, and that's a figure that's agreed between Homes of Scotland and the Council, and that gives you a record of all houses to be built in the LG1 sub-area that are allocated in the plan. And so it also clarifies, if you go to APP2 and the tables in the annex where we set out the actual completions in the years up to the start of the House and Land Audit. And that will give you a comprehensive statement of houses built and houses to be built in the LG sub area.
Okay, I may come back to you on some of that, but let's just now for the council. What are your thoughts on my table one? Would you correct it at all?
I direct that to Mr. Wilson just to make clear what is and is not included in your table.
Yes, the table set out there excludes two sites that are within the Liberton and Gillinton contribution zone, which have a cumulative impact, and to which the redrawn of the catchment boundaries, the new Broomhills Primary releases capacity, which is going to help absorb the impact of these two sites. Those have been excluded from the table because they weren't in the 2019 audit, House and Land Audit Completions Programme. They weren't identified as effective and they weren't programmed, but they are very much sites in the local development plan, identified in the local development plan. One of them is a numbered proposal, which we anticipate to come forward during the LDP period and have an impact on, come forward for housing and have an impact on school capacity, and which therefore need to be taken account of when considering cumulative impact of school capacity. The sites in question were identified in the council's local development plan education infrastructure appraisal, August 2018, one that Mr. Salter just referred to, document 3.5. The sites are named HSG 28 Ellens Glen Road, and the site just referred to as Liberton Hospital, which local development plan site brief identifies as having housing potential. It's on page 76 of the local development plan. These are both sites which the council's education appraisal throughout has assumed or accommodated in terms of development capacity and infrastructure capacity, and which we continue to consider should be had regard to when considering infrastructure capacity.
Okay. Thank you. The reason I attached my understanding of the parameters was I do think it's important for me to nail down so far as I can all the necessary parameters, and I want to talk about that if there are differences in item 7. So I don't want to spend time now running through that table in detail. We'll come back to that, and perhaps that's some homework I can give the parties. Can I just come back to the council there? Mr. Salter mentioned that in his production APP2, he had set out the completions up to the 2019 housing land audit. Do you agree that those are correct?
Sorry, can you direct me to that document once more? I'm assuming I'm the council person, I'll be fielding this. But what was that? Can I have the document reference once more, please? Sorry.
It was Mr. Salter in his production APP2, from memory, he was doing an analysis for LG1 sub area, and he was in a table he highlighted the completions up till the 2019 housing land audit, and then took the 2019 housing land audit programming thereafter to generate the number of children.
So if it helps, it's appendix 2.1, table 1.
I'm not able to get that in front of me just now, but if it's a complete extract of the programming from the 2019 audit, then we'd consider that to be accurate as of 1st of April last year. But it won't be a full picture of the amount of housing that will come forward during the plan period, because the Housing Land Audit Completions Programme is an annual snapshot, and the whole point we update it every 12 months if we can, subject to coronavirus pandemics, is keep on top of that, and that's why we do the annual update of the action programme as well. So insofar, I take on trust that it's an accurate extract from our audit completion programme, but it won't be an up-to-date picture of what will happen, because things have moved on in the past year. We just don't have a new document to provide a fresh update on
that. Okay, I've made a note. I've made a note of that, and again, we'll talk about that in our wash-up session. Can I, before we move on from this bullet point, can I just ask the appellant, is there any likelihood of significant change to these housing figures, whether we use my table or an alternative?
So can I just place a marker briefly? The two sites that have just been referred to by Mr. Wilson, whilst one of them may be referred to in CD 3.5, we didn't understand these sites to be raised in their evidence before. I think we had first notice of this on Friday. We don't consider they should be taken into account at this stage for reasons we can deal with at whichever appropriate moment you wish to have those considered. Can I then pass your questions? That's just raising a marker. Can I just pass your question to Mr. Salter as to whether there is any significant difference in using his figures or the figures in your table?
So I think the figures at table 1 show the likely scale of development, the actual development of houses and flat in the LG1 sub-area, and it confirms that all the developments referred to in the 2019 audit would actually be complete by the end of the local development plan period. So if you use that data input to do an impact assessment, you should be accounting for all people in that area. And so it's worth pointing out that in the first 3 years, 624 homes were complete, and all of the children from these homes will be starting to work through the school system, both primary and secondary.
Okay. Council, any thoughts or comments on that?
I'm going to make the observation, obviously, that it exemplifies the difficulty of trying to reach accurate numbers at any particular time, and what the estimated new housing development in the area will be at any particular time over a particular period will vary, not only from the differences in the actual housing come forward and the completions, but the predictions are never going to be completely accurate. And we're just trying to provide you with all the relevant information, and it'll be a matter for you how significant the differences are.
Okay, is that the council finished?
Assuming we're coming back to this at a later point, I think we're not wanting to go into absolute detail on this, and you mentioned maybe setting homework for both parties for that. So we've got a figure of what your table appended to the hearing has focused attention on this, and in a nutshell, it doesn't provide a full picture of the amount of growth that needs to be planned for in terms of school capacity.
Right. Okay. I put that table out there for that reason, and under item 7, I'll be inviting the parties to correct my table and amend it as they see fit, and we'll talk through the procedural implications of that. So that's helpful. I think I'm done with that bullet point. Can I now move on to the next one, typical primary school accommodation requirements? And I'm going to qualify the questions I ask here by saying that of course, I recognise that this is a simplified hypothetical situation, but at the time I thought it was helpful for me to ask. I'm going to start with the appellants. In my written inquiry questions, I asked what would be the typical requirements, and you rightly replied that it depends, but typically approximately 1,000 houses would support a single stream primary school. Do I take it that 2,000 to 2,500 houses would typically support a two-stream primary school? Would that be fair?
So it would be fair, but you would have to take account of all the variables to do that, and to do that you would have to understand the rate of house building, which is so for example, if the houses were being built at 100 houses per annum or 200, it would have a markedly different impact on the capacity of the school. So it's not a straightforward question, but clearly the more houses, the bigger the school.
Perhaps I could add just one other caveat to that. It would also depend on the existing spare capacity that was in the area in terms of whether it would support a new school to that level. But
I think Mr. Finley's right. I think we provided an answer based on the fact that there was no school. This is a very dynamic picture because you could relate the existing primary school to a bath where there's no plug in it. So as you pour the water in at one end, it drains at the other end, and as new pupils come in, pupils in P7 exit the school and so on. And we found in our modelling approach across Scotland as a whole, the demographic trends within the school, if I'm describing it that, is a particularly relevant factor, particularly if a school role, for example, is falling within the school itself.
Okay. I would stress this. In my mind, I was trying to simplify things and thinking of a brand new community where there was no existing facilities, just to try and get a feel for whether there were any rule of thumbs. But perhaps that was naive of me. For the council, any thoughts or comments on that? Would you agree with that?
Sir, I would agree with that, and agree with the difficulties of answering the questions, given the number of variables. And I agree, you, sir, were perhaps thinking more of how many houses are there in a school catchment area, or how many houses go into a typical school as opposed to a new one coming from scratch, because that depends on the existing situation before you introduce that new school. But obviously it's a question for Mr. Crockett to try and explain in more detail, with the obvious caveat that nothing is particularly typical. You're still on mute, Robbie.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that the typical is a very difficult thing to quantify, and I agree with Mr. Salter in that respect. We also, our response to that question, as you'll be aware, had lots of caveats around what typical might mean, and that included what the which catchment the school was in, the capacity of surrounding schools, the capacity of the school where the new building was being placed. But we also need to consider the educational impact on pupils from existing, but also from any proposed new development. There are a whole raft of issues which make this a non-typical or very difficult to put to quantify exactly what that would look like. I would say that I don't think the build out rate is particularly important in this respect. It's the total number of houses that will be there and that will continue to generate pupils for years to come. Their build out rate may be important initially in planning when the school arrives and how it builds out, perhaps, but the actual build out rate is not important where a decision to place a school was made.
So I don't know if you were thinking almost a situation where there are no buildings and no schools, and how many houses would it take before you needed a second school or something in that scenario? Which I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but it's a very complicated question to try and answer in the.
I was thinking if one was planning a whole new community on its own. I was trying to simplify things, but I've noted all your comments, and but before I move on, can I just ask this question of the appellants team? Is it your position then that it's completely inconceivable that a development of 2,500 houses could ever justify a two-stream and single-stream school? That I would never ever be able to find an example of that in Scotland. Is that your position?
So it always depends on the data and the information in the area that you're in. In terms of the work that we've done, if you take the work that we've done for this appeal, the council's already concluded that the scale of mitigation of the second primary school at Gilmerton Station Road currently isn't required. And that's based on their judgment, which is presented in the inquiry report, that the 4-class extension to Gilmerton is all that's required now. And that's just a small example of how 2 years ago the council thought we needed both schools. They've taken the evidence of the current build rates and concluded that that mitigation is currently no longer required. So if we just focus in on our own area for the purposes of this appeal, then that's quite a significant change. Yet the council's position is the houses, there's more homes being built, and Mr. Crockett came to that view, and Mr. Crockett came to that view by applying the council's new CHRs as well. So that increased substantially the number of pupils within that catchment area. So in terms of the dynamic, so it's quite marked. And it's all about the data, it's all about the trends, it's all about what's going on the ground, how many pupils are actually attending from the development. And we'll come on to that in due course, but we've looked at the council's analysis that they provided for the CHRs, and we'll stand by the evidence that we provided, and that was set in 85.
Okay, we will indeed be looking at all that in some detail later on in the agenda, but just trying to get back to my hopelessly simplified hypothetical situation. Am I correct to summarize the answer to your question is it depends?
It depends on the key factors, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so my attempt to find a rule of thumb is thwarted.
So in my experience, there isn't a rule of thumb to apply.
Okay, thank you. Council, any thoughts or comments on what you've just heard?
Probably invite Mr. Crockett to respond to that, and I don't know if he might be able to give any sort of indication if starting from scratch, how many houses would lead to a one-stream school. Obviously, it's more important perhaps when you're moving from 1 to 2, because as soon as you've got any houses, you need a school. The question might be how many houses before you get to a double-stream school if you're starting from absolute scratch. And you're still on mute, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, if you were starting from a completely blank canvas and there was nothing around, then I think you would just rely simply on the CHRs to identify the scale of the school that will be required. That being the case, and the basis that we currently have a CHR of 3.26 per house. If assuming it was houses rather than flats, assuming that, then you'd be looking at 644 houses for a single stream school, which would be working capacity of 210, and then it will be scalable from there. But as we've already discussed, I think all things being equal, that's an entirely theoretical position.
I'll just point out we're obviously address Mr. Thorter's going on to the detail. I presume we'll come back to that in due course, sir. And that wasn't really an answer to the question you asked, which hopefully Mr. Crockett's now tried to give you an idea on that. As I also look at matters as a simple layman, hopefully there's a simple question and that answers that question. We can leave the rest till later.
Okay, thank you. I think I've explored as much as I can my attempts to simplify. Can we now move on to the next bullet point, existing spare primary school accommodation capacity? And if I can start with the appellants, I set out in tables 2 and 3 with the data, my understanding of the key parameters. Have I got tables 2 and 3 correct in your opinion?
So I think I'll ask Mr. Salter to deal with that, but in our view, they need to be, I think, in summary, amended to take into account the what is now the agreed mitigation at Gilmerton Primary School. And Mr. Salter can give you the figures that would bring the tables up to speed with that in mind.
So, sir, given the decision of the council to change what the mitigation is to be at Gilmerton Primary School, the council confirms that a 4th-class extension at Gilmerton would generate working capacity of 693 pupils. So in Gilmerton, the working capacity is now 693. Gracemount remains at 560. And the total capacity for the sub-area is now 1,253, which is an increase of 147. And that's on the council's working capacity. In terms of planning capacity, a 23 class would have 701 pupils, which is 651 pupils served for a 21 class school, plus another 2 classes at 25 each. And the change to that for the LG1 sub-area takes the planning capacity up to 1,285 pupils. That's 701 at Gilmerton, 584 at Basement, giving a total of 1,285, and that's an increase of 142 pupils.
Okay.
And the spare capacity figures will change accordingly with those changes. Give you the spare capacity figure, the updated spare capacity figures, if that would assist. Or
yeah, I'm very wary of just making notes from. I'm grateful for your comments, but I'm very wary of just making notes in case I mishear or note them down. So, you know, the purpose of circulating these was to make sure that parties understood what my understanding was, and if there are changes to be made, and clearly you think there are, then I want those properly recorded. For the council, would you agree with those comments?
Well, sir, the initial response is that appears to be on the presumption that Appeal 2 and the now agreed position goes forward, and then putting those into the spare capacity. My understanding that this table was before that's brought into consideration, and I'll leave it to Mr. Crockett to talk about the detail, but it may well be that you need to be provided with updated figures on both hypotheses just to see the difference rather than making assumptions in relation to what's going to happen.
Yes, I had based it on what the current position was, rather than if any particular appeal had been allowed. That would come in on some of the later tables. Sorry, Mr. Crockett, I jumped in there.
No, I mean, I can respond on what you have presented here in your table, without going through the detail of what Mr. Salter has provided. And your table, in terms of table 3, certainly seems to reflect the position as I understand it. Yeah.
Okay. If I can, I say we obviously need. I want to nail down all these floppy bits of data that is hanging around if I can. But before I move off this bullet point, can I just ask the council this question? Is it possible to define spare existing capacity by reference to any one year?
I think it's a question.
Sorry, sorry, could you clarify the question for me?
Yeah, is it possible in your view to define, you know, the spare existing capacity by reference to any one year?
Well, obviously, schools are fluid entities. Pupils come and pupils go, and each year there is a new intake and there is a P7 that rolls out. What you see before you in terms of the 2019 roll is a snapshot of a return to the Scottish Government as part of a census, which is taken in September each year. But through the school year, between September and the end of the school year, there will be changes take place, and that capacity will shift and change as pupils come and pupils go. So the answer is that if I were to look at the actual role of Gilmerton Primary School just now, it wouldn't say 407. It wouldn't be 473. It would be different to that. And the other thing is that where the spare capacity is the important part. the spare capacity may well all be at P6 and P7, in which case the P7 that's leaving, a larger P1 comes in, can have a significant change in the role the following year. So the answer is that what you're seeing there is simply a snapshot on a day when the census is taken, but through the year, that role will change.
And so obviously add to that, it obviously change even more over a period of years or over a period of a local development plan. The underlying capacity of a school will change. So there is a danger in looking at one particular point in time and assuming that existing capacity will be there for planning purposes.
Okay, thank you. Appellants, any thoughts or comments on that?
In terms of the school role, I think we would all agree that from within the LG1 sub-area, both Gilmerton and Gracemount will already have pupils from the new housing going through both schools. And I mentioned previously that 662 homes that have been built to date. So, as always, it's a very dynamic position. So, for example, in the assessment, the cumulative assessment that the council has done, spare capacity isn't taken into account at all. Yet, in their description to Scottish ministers about what work they had carried out, they stated to Scottish ministers that they had taken spare capacity into account. The principle of whether you look at spare capacity is a relevant matter. Clearly, if a school has capacity, then that should be considered in terms of an impact assessment. If you're using school role projections, as we have done in other council areas, you can get down to the age group class structure of the pupils. And you can say we've got 70 pupils in P1 and we've got 3 classes, and you start to see, can you actually get the pupils in through the classes? So there's much more detail that can be applied, which hasn't been done here, and it hasn't been done here because the council's overall method doesn't address any of these matters.
Okay, I'm not interested today in comments to the Scottish Government about the supplementary guidance. Can I just come back to you, Mr. Salter? In terms of my question, is your answer that yes, their spare capacity can be calculated by reference to any one particular year?
Yes.
Okay, I think I've got your positions that I need. I'm now going to move on to the next bullet point, and I'm going to try and see if I can dispose of these things in short order, but perhaps I'm being ambitious. If we look at table 5, what I was attempting to try and do was calculate what the two parties were telling me about the capacity that would be created for the current Section 75 agreement and the 3 appeals. So slightly nervously, I asked the appellants, have I set those positions out correctly in table 5?
Well, I'll pass over to Mr. Salter for the detail, but our answer will be insofar as you're looking at the current position and not taking into account any assumed mitigation in it provided under Appeal 2 as agreed with the Council, or under Appeal 1, which the same would be provided. That, as I understand it, yes, but I'll ask Mr. Silver.
So in terms of Appeal 1, when we originally applied, we had assumed there would be 7 classes required at Broom Hills, and that an extension to Gilmerton would be required. We had a debate about whether it's 19 classes at Gilmerton or 21. We thought the position was 21 given the accommodation schedule. So we were advancing 7+2, but we now accept from the discussions over Appeal 2 that it's 19 going to 23, so we would be 7+4 for Appeal 1. And for Appeal 2, we would accept that all 14 classes at Broom Hills should be fully funded. And again, the further 4 classes at Gilmerton itself. But, so just to be clear, that's about who pays for what. It's not about there'll be less classes there. The accommodation at Broom Hills will always be 420 pupils working capacity and 434 planning capacity.
Yes, I was. Table 5 is trying to capture the capacity that is paid for. So I think you're in agreement. 11 and 18, and are you in agreement with 21?
Yes.
Well, yes. And what I wasn't sure about was how many children, because the parties have different ways of calculating this. So could you fill in my question marks on Appeal 1 and Appeal 2?
Yes, the number of pupils on Appeal 1 following the British Government's guidance of planning capacity would be 359. And for Appeal 2, it would be 576.
576. Sorry, I missed your answer to Appeal 1.
359.
359. Okay. Thank you. The council, have you any comments to make on my Table 5?
Sir, I think it's correct as far as the council numbers you've indicated, and we need to check what the appellant's position is on it, but I think Mr. Crockett may have some further comment just on that table.
Yeah, the capacity, working capacity for an 11 class primary school would be 294. For 80, and for 18 classes, it's 504.
Okay. Right. Well, this just illustrates the point that I'm clearly, I clearly got my homework wrong reading your evidence, and we'll need to get that all established. Okay, I think I've achieved my object for those 4 bullet points. Can I now go to the next one, implications of opening Broom Hills Primary School? And can I start with the council? In your view, what will be the short and long-term implications of opening the new school in terms of how it will impact on Gilmerton and Gracemount?
That's a question for Mr. Crockett.
So the impact of a new school is unknown at this point in time. We have initial registration period going on for P1 pupils to Broom Hills, but we would anticipate that the school will prove to be popular with pupils from Gracemount and Gilmerton, and indeed the surrounding areas, because it is a new facility, and therefore initially may draw more pupils, out of catchment pupils, it should be said at that, than you would expect doing it as the norm. But over time, we would expect that would reduce, and that pupils would revert back to their catchment school. Now, the council has the capacity to refuse non-catchment places, and that may be required, as Broom Hills will have limited capacity within its classroom setup and the number of classes that are formed and the number of pupils within those classes. But we would expect there to be, expect the catchment pupils who are currently, or the new catchment incorporates part of what was Gracemount's catchment area, and we would expect those pupils to shift slowly but surely from that area to Broom Hills. There is no sibling guarantee in place, so siblings who are attending Gracemount but find that they are now in catchment for Broom Hills may also put in out of catchment placing requests, which may put pressure on other areas of the school. But at the moment, the plan is to open Broom Hills Primary School with just a single P1 class and slowly build the school up over time. So initially it will just be a P1 class. It will not take in pupils who are P2 upwards at this point in this year. And we'll review the requirement and whether there's demand to open it up for further years in the year as time goes on.
So can I just add to that my understanding of that will mean that space will be freed up in the existing Gracemount and Gilmerton primary schools, which will be filled or could be filled by other new development in the area, which is why you need to look at it on a cumulative basis for your purposes.
I just want to check I understood your answer, Mr. Crockett. So when the school opens in August, it will just literally have one class, one P1 class.
Well, we'll have two P1 classes, but yes, it will just open with P1.
So there'll be no P2s or P7s.
No, opening up a new school is not a straightforward process, particularly where it's with a new development, because you would essentially be asking that pupils transfer from their existing schooling to a new facility, and for the most part, pupils in upper years will be settled within other schools. So the normal process, or a process which a lot of other authorities have followed, and which we've followed when we open new schools, is to build up the school gradually over a period of time.
Okay. Appellants, any thoughts or comments on what you've just heard?
I'll ask Mr. Salter to go first, and then I'll.
I'm a bit surprised at that. We clearly work with other local authorities that open new schools and new development very similar to this. And our experience from elsewhere is they don't restrict the intake to P1 only. They welcome pupils within the new catchment area to join a new school. They leave it to the parents to decide whether the parents will keep their children or with siblings at the existing school. But this is the first time I've heard about a council opening, a 14-class school and simply using restricting it to P1. So can I ask how many pupils, Mr. Crockett, how many pupils are in the P1 classes?
Yes, if you can answer that, Mr. Crockett.
So it'll be 2 classes with a maximum capacity of 25 in each.
Sorry, the question is, what is the actual number of P1 pupils coming to the school?
At the moment, I think the registrations are around about 50. It's at its maximum.
Okay, thank you.
I think Mr. was going to round up.
So I was just looking at the council's answer to your question 5 on school location accommodation. Suggests that the occupancy level will be very low and will remain low in the short term. I think I'm going to reflect on that, and no doubt I think anything I was going to add would be by way of comment, which I can put in closing submission.
Okay. I see Mr. Crockett's got his hand up. I will offer it back to the council. Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, it was just to add that I think on the back of Mr. Salter's statement that it's unusual to open a school from, well, that's certainly not our experience. There are authorities who do that, and I would also say that if we open it up to every year group, it creates a very inefficient school, potentially with very low numbers in classes, potentially with classes with no pupils in them. So to plan on the basis of opening a school with 14 classes right from the outset, or even a limited number of classes from the outset, is an inefficient way of doing it.
Okay, thank you. I'm again going to ask a question of the council. My understanding, certainly from the original impact assessment, is that the council's ultimate vision for primary school provision in this area is to have 2 stream schools at Broom Hills, Gilmerton, and Gracemount, and a single stream at Gilmerton Station Road. Have I picked up correctly? That was at least the plan that the council was aiming for.
So I think that was obviously the plan at the stage of the LDP, but obviously the question for Mr. Crockett to explain that and where we are now.
Yes, that's correct. So Gracemount is currently 3-stream school and would remain as it is. 2 double-stream school at Broom Hills, and Gilmerton Primary School. Ultimately, we would like to get that to double-stream, and then a single-stream with expansion strategy at Gilmerton Station Road would be ultimately what we would want to be aiming for.
And what kind of birth rate? This is a follow-up question to the council. What kind of annual birth rate would you be expecting necessary to sustain that number of P1 classes?
Yeah, Mr. Crockett.
I don't think there's an easy answer for that I can give you right now in terms of the numbers of births we would expect within the area. The birth rate will fluctuate, and it will go up, and it will go down. It will change over a period of time. Certainly, the number of births which has taken place in the area has fallen, and we would expect that I think as the original inquiry showed, that the birth rate over time will increase again, and will result in additional pupils being generated. The provision of new housing will push that birth rate up, and we would expect that while the birth rate at the moment in the area and as in the city as a whole has been going downward, we would expect that there will be a period of time when that will reverse and will go the opposite direction. And I think our inquiry report includes historic data which looks at the birth rate and population data within the area, the LG1 area, that illustrates that.
Okay, thank you. The appellant, any thoughts or comments on that?
I'll ask Mr. Salter to.
So Mr. Crockett succinctly explained what the strategy in the LG1 sub-area is. Take the two existing schools, expectation in the long term is to go from 3 stream to 2. We build 2 new schools, single stream and a double stream. We start off with 2 schools with 6 streams in them, and we end up with 4 schools with 7 streams in them. So, and that is the essence of the appeal, that the long-term ambition of the council, supported by its impact assessment, isn't about accommodating pupils from new development. It's about, which appears to be only a net increase of 1 stream. I think our opinion it's bigger than that, but that seems to be the essence of why we're here today.
Okay, I think I don't think we can add any more to that. Can we move on to our next bullet point for the appellant? Are there any implications of COVID in terms of the various projections and predictions that are before me, do you think?
But I think there are potentially 2 issues. The first one is a market reaction to COVID, and the likelihood, as you probably heard on the news from most of the house builders, won't be a rebound immediately, and it might take up to 2 years to get back to where we are now. The implication of that is there'll be probably lesser sales and therefore less pupils to go into the accommodation within the LG1 sub-area. And on that basis, the work that we've done should be regarded as what we would name it as the worst case scenario now with COVID. Secondly, from the council's perspective, as just has been confirmed, the council has a primary school with 12 classrooms that are vacant. It has general purpose rooms which are vacant, and it's in a position, and how it wishes to manage the LG1 sub-area, it's probably better placed than any other area within the city to accommodate pupils in smaller classes. So the pupils from Gracemount and Gilberton could go to Broomhills on a temporary basis and be schooled in a school with 2 metres, etc. So the council's in a fortunate position here, depending on how it wishes to manage COVID-19.
Okay, council, any thoughts or comments on that?
Obviously, there's a question for Mr. Crockett, who's been closely involved in the issues.
Thank you. Yeah, the planning for COVID, I don't think there's any easy response to that, and the impact is something which we'll continue to assess. I think where Gracemount and Gilmerton are concerned in the area as a whole, we would be in a stronger position if Broomhills were to be completed. Unfortunately, it's not. And the build-out time for that at the moment is unknown. It will not open in August. The impact on COVID in the long term is something that we are looking at and assessing. Clearly, at the moment, with social distancing, the design of schools is something that needs to be reviewed. Whether there's a requirement for additional space in schools is something which needs to be looked at, and whether that means that we have either bigger schools or smaller classes, I think is something for the long term, but it's clearly something which is of consideration. So at the moment, there's no easy answer to what the impact is, and it's something which will continue to be assessed. But clearly there are impacts on the way that potentially that buildings are laid out and the capacity that they offer.
I'll offer that back to the appellants. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Having described benefits and impacts, clearly COVID is a short-term matter. Both the Scottish Government and the UK Government are very committed in whatever way is a desirable outcome to get children back to school again in a different way. And again, in Scotland, we've been told that from First Minister that they are looking for answers to get back to normal, not the new normal, get back to an adjusted normal before the end of the next school year. So we're hoping, I think we're all hoping at this inquiry that all of these matters will be resolved and children can go back to school.
Council, final word.
Well, so I think hopefully the COVID will be a relatively short-term and passing phenomenon, but it does highlight the need to be flexible, and it may have more long-term considerations in the future building of schools. The degree to which the information is available at the moment for you to take that into account, sir, is quite difficult to provide at the moment when we don't even know what's happening in the next few months, how long that effect will take place. But looking over the longer term and the planning period, I think the matters have already been raised that are relevant, and we can't really predict too much. But I see Mr. Crockett has something further he wants to say as well. Crockett.
The one final thing that I would add is we also don't know what the COVID situation and the lockdown will do to birth rates in the area. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think so. Can we now move on to the final bullet point? I've given an opportunity in each of the agenda items for the parties to address any overall conclusions they want me to take from what we've discussed. I'm conscious that we would have had an inquiry, and it would have been up to each party to direct the questions. Unfortunately, you've got to rely on me. So this is an opportunity if you did have any points you wanted to make about the overall conclusions you were inviting me to draw in relation to what we've just discussed under this agenda item. And I'll start with the council.
Well, so I wouldn't propose any particular conclusions from this section. It might be more appropriate after we've got into the detail in the other sections.
Okay. Mr. Finlay?
We may have a few more overall conclusions. We will ask Mr. Salter to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Finlay. So the first one is, I think it's now agreed between the parties that new housing in the LG1 sub-area should not fully fund the 2 new schools as proposed. 651 people planning capacity and 630 people working capacity. That's because as of the decision in March to amend the mitigation, I think that's CD 1313, the council accepted the mitigation should be 4 classes at Gilmerton instead of the new school at Gilmerton Station Road and the 14 classes at Broom Hills. So the council to date has not provided any evidence to explain its proposed mitigation of the 2 new schools when the people demand from the cumulative approach was a maximum of 599 pupils. So the that's also clear. And it's also clear that the council did not take into account available spare capacity, which is now 157 pupils planning capacity, formerly, and was 120 pupils working capacity, and that's as August 2018. The required mitigation is a difference, in our opinion, between the 599 pupils assessed in the education infrastructure appraisal and the spare capacity, which is, as explained earlier, is 115 pupils planning capacity and 120 pupils working capacity. Taking that into account, we should only be seeking mitigation for 442 pupils planning capacity, 479 working capacity. The council repeatedly has stated that New Brighton should fully fund the cost of Broom Hills Primary as a new stream school. As far as we can ascertain from all the evidence led to date, is that when you looked at the original catchment consultation paper back in 2016, and that's CD 6.7, para 4.21, this confirmed that as then, the council would have expected 254 pupils from the existing homes and further new housing would be 242. So it was this issue at that time so it began to ring bells saying, why is the private sector funding 100% Broom Hills and not 50%, say? I mentioned that the mitigation now approved at Gilmerton, and if I followed Mr. Crockett's calculation correctly in the inquiry report, applied the 2019 CHRs. So those CHRs will increase the number of pupils from the same housing by an extra 26%. So without changing any other factor, simply changing the CHR increases the number of pupils expected in the LG1 sub-area by 26%. We'll come on to the key parameters and the updates. We'll deal with that later. And I think on the CHRs, I'm happy to defer my comments that I was going to make now to when we go to the CHRs later on in the agenda. And it keeps coming back to us in terms of the evidence led by the council that it's very difficult to make the case that the private sector or private house building needs to fully fund Broom Hills. We may not agree today that it's 50-50, but it certainly never has been and I've never seen any evidence from the council to suggest it should be 100%.
That's our section.
Okay, if we can now move on to agenda item 3, let's see if we can dispose of at least the first bullet point, and then we'll break this first session. I've got some questions I want to direct to the council regarding their longitudinal or their survey of house building and the number of children coming from houses, which was contained in CD 14.8. So if I suspect to be Mr. Crockett has that available. So I've got a series of questions really to help me understand that. So if you could nod, Mr. Crockett, when you've got hold of it.
Okay, I have it in front of me.
Okay, so the first column I take is named housing estates in Edinburgh, and then we get to the section of the table which deals with primary schools. Again, I take it that the first column is the number of houses in those estates. Were those houses all completed, or could it have also, this survey carried on whilst house construction was still taking place?
No, these are full completed houses.
So all those estates were completed.
Mm-hmm. So that's the number of houses in that estate, residential address points in that estate.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, thank you. Is the number of children I see for each of those years, is that all primary age children, or all primary age children at council schools, or all primary school children in non-denominational schools?
That will be all non-denominational pupils for primary school. So it would be cover all of them. It wouldn't be for a specific school.
It's not for a specific school, but it doesn't include children who attend a Roman Catholic primary school, for example.
No.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And my final question: how did you count the children?
How do we count? We count the children by we obviously have address points for all the pupils who are registered in the city. So what this doesn't include and wouldn't include would be pupils who are not within the council system. So it would not include pupils, for example, who are attending the independent sector. What that shows is, for example, that at West Granton A, which is the third one down on the list, there are 207 houses or address points in that estate, and that there are 60 pupils who reside within that reside in that estate at the point this survey was undertaken.
but it then goes on, just taking that as an example, that in 2005 there were 71.
Yes, so it shows over time the number, or for each year, the number of pupils that were in that estate. So for 2005, yes, you have 71. 2006, you've got 66.
Yeah. And that's all children who attend city council non-denominational primary schools. Might not be their catchment primary school, but it would all be non-denominational. Yes. Okay, thank you for that. For the appellant, any thoughts or comments on what you've just heard?
In terms of the labelling, so we thought that the primary, with the reference to both denominational and denominational.
Yeah. Sorry.
So, yeah. So that's news. My understanding is not all of these developments were completed in 2005. One of the questions that we had for the council was to correlate the pupil numbers from the new housing on a longitudinal basis, if we won't use that term, with the pupils coming from them. So I'd like to draw your attention on CD 14.8, because there was a criticism of us omitting some of this data from our appraisal in APP5. But everything it says some too early to evaluate. I don't know if you notice that. So in the first column under the monies.
Perhaps I can ask you, Mr. Salter, are you aware of any further information which would allow those now to be evaluated? Is there any further information before the reporter?
None at all. So we asked the council for further clarification back in December. This is very useful, but it only paints a particular. Well, the council's only used it to say, as we do, what is the peak number of pupils coming out of each development, which they call the P-max. And then they decided that the CHR should be the average of all the peak max. But again, as we keep highlighting to yourself, in exchanges with the council, that is that an appropriate way to do it, because what this data set provides, and so you may be surprised, but this is the best data set I've seen on CHRs, not only in Edinburgh but across Scotland, because this tends not to be done. And then once you start to appraise it, you get a completely different picture from it than is presented by the council, particularly in their conclusion that if you adopt a P-max, it's because there are more pupils coming out of homes, and accordingly we need to increase the CHRs and increase the level of impact that's going to arise. And so we've really struggled to be able to confirm that is the case, because as the council is aware and you're aware, we took 12 sites, nearly 2,000 houses. We mapped the trend, and we couldn't get the actual numbers to breach the CHRs in the education infrastructure appraisal, far less the new CHRs that the council did for the new mitigation at Gilmerton Primary.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in there. I will ask the parties what conclusions you're inviting me to draw from that particular study. Hang on a second, can I just check my notes? Yeah, we'll come on to that later. I think I need to just go around again. The council, any comments you want to make in reply to Mr. Salter?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I would just clarify, Mr. Salter is correct. It's Roman Catholic and non-denominational pupils who are included in that table. I would say that I think this, and I appreciate Mr. Salter's compliment, that it is a very comprehensive approach. I think that the appellant in their approach to projections has argued that we need to address the peak and thereafter the rest doesn't matter. I think what these rates are doing is doing exactly that, is looking at the peak, the point at which the production rate is at its greatest. I think that I'm surprised that the appellant hasn't been able to produce rates or reproduce rates of a similar of a similar level themselves. The documents they've submitted from other authorities as part of their submission demonstrate that actually the rates here are reasonable. I accept that the wording, some too early to evaluate, is a little misleading in some respects, but this is a live sheet. We update it annually, and unfortunately that has remained in. But clearly you can see from the developments which are most recent, and these are probably the ones which are most important because they are the most recent and reflect the most recent trends. They show that the actual generation rates from developments more recently are significantly higher actually than the rates that we're proposing and that we've put forward. So I don't think it's an unreasonable approach to take.
Okay, appellant, any final say before we move on to the next bullet point?
So can we explore APP5 in the graph in the appendix?
Mm-hmm.
So so the graph I would like the council and yourself to have before you is the second draft that we submitted, which has got more CHRs in it.
Yes, I have that. I have that.
Yeah. And so what we did is, in that data set of nearly 2,000 homes, we just mapped the number of children attending both primary schools, which is both the non-denominational and the denominational schools. That confirms that there is a peak. It also confirms that the number of pupils attending school will fall. It falls over time because households in new houses mature. There'll certainly be turnover, but in the long term, where you get to is maturing housing is producing less pupils. What is significant in the graph, sir, is if you look at the various lines, because that's the council's cumulative approach. And if we start with the various lines above the blue line, which is the graph of actual pupils, you'll see that if you apply the council's non-denominational primary CHR, it's 0.26. That isn't breached any time during that period, and it's certainly there may well be a slight difference But if we were graphing it and we put it the other new developments, there would still be a significant gap. If we then go up to the pupils on the CHR of 0.3, and we just keep heading north up to the latest amendment to the CHR at 0.37 for primary, you're beginning to get some idea of the gap between the blue line and the red line at the very top of the graph itself. So it's a very large difference. And our conclusion was the evidence, which is the orange graph near the 600 mark, which is the primary original CHR, and the education infrastructure appraisal seems remarkably valid to me. Because if it was breaching, then the blue line would go through the orange line at some point. And I think this graph also demonstrates, this is all pupils from new housing, is once you hit the peak, it goes down. There might be variations, and because we don't know the build rates, I don't know if these slight differences from time to time is due to the house building rates. But you can see it is not one of more and more pupils coming to school. And my conclusion from the work that Mr. Crockett did in the inquiry report is more than likely by applying the new CHRs, none of these pupils will actually appear in school. I'm afraid that I've got to say that, but it's certainly not making any sense to us at all. If the council had put more completion data, we could have actually produced the same graph for every housing development, and I think we could have correlated the blue line to all the separate developments. So my conclusion from all of this is that the additional pupils coming from applying the new CHRs will not actually appear in the school, and the evidence from the council is the school roles are going in a different direction at the present time, and continues to support that. So I've got other comments to make, but I'm happy to park here and let the council come back about the graph.
I will hand it over to the council. I'm conscious of time, but could I put a point to you, Mr. Salter? Could you not also interpret your graph comparing the blue line with the yellow line and say, well, for infrastructure planning purposes, that's not a bad fit?
Well, actually, sir, that's because the council's it's actually the orange line, because as Mr. Crockett has corrected himself, it's for primary school and not non-denominational. So I put that in just to show what it would have been, but the comparison is actually the orange line, the primary CHR of 0.3, because this data is for denominational and non-denominational.
Thank you for that. Council, any thoughts or comments? And I think I'm going to have to then close this first session.
It's Mr. Crockett again.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm maybe looking at the wrong graph. We are talking about Appendix 5.1, are we? The CHR study. Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think that I don't see this as valid because it doesn't include the more recent sites. That's one point. There seem to be a lot of assumptions in there, and the way that it's been presented as well. There's an assumption that sites are directly connected to one another. We know from recent developments that North Kirkliston that the peaks occur simultaneously, as each of the separate developments are built within separate timeframes. It appears to be quite diluted, I think, the table that's been presented. And I don't think that that it is representative of the data within the table.
Right, it's 2 minutes past 12. We've only nibbled at agenda item 3, so we'll have to reconvene. And of course, there's an opportunity at the end of agenda item 3 for you to tell me what overall conclusions you wish to take. So I'm going to end the session now. Thank you very much for your participation. It seemed to work okay, and we will repeat the startup. So if you can ready to log on in response to a new email link, which will be sent to you for say like 10 to 2, and so we can kick off in a timely fashion. And I remain hopeful that we can complete matters today. So thank you very much, and I will see you again at 10 to 2.